Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking with immigration lawyer Polina Elizarova. Polina, good to see you again.
Hi, Sean.
So today we're talking about how to bring your family to Canada. You get this question all the time. People say, I want to bring either a mother, a father, a grandparent, something like that, over to Canada. There's a number of ways to do it and a long process to kind of go through to do it. But you did send me this one quote, which I thought was interesting, which is that the government of Canada, March 2022, put out this statement that family reunification is a priority for the government of Canada. Go into that a little bit.
Family reunification was always one of the priorities of Canada immigration system. We're talking about the family immigration sponsorship program. Family sponsorship is a large group of different programs for different relatives that includes parents, spouses, common law partners, dependent children, and other relatives. So it's not something new that the government announced in March. It's just that they continue to work on making these applications a priority in terms of processing and paying attention to them and put them in the first in the lines,
Right.
current backlogs.
Right. So after COVID kind of slowed everything down, the lockdowns and things, staff shortages and such have slowed a lot of things down. But this is a priority again. The government's keeping their eye on it. And we're going to go into who can be a sponsor. So if you're sitting there watching this video and you want to sponsor someone, maybe this applies to you. Paulina, go into who can sponsor a family member to Canada.
Yeah, often when people come to Canada as workers, we have inquiries from them right away. How do I bring my brother? How do I bring my parents? Unfortunately, family sponsorship is only available for Canadian citizens and permanent residents. If you're in Canada on student or visitor visa, you won't be able to sponsor any family members. Your spouse and kids can come with you on work visas, but for sponsorship for permanent residents, it's only for citizens and permanent residents. A person generally must be at least 18 years old. The person must reside in Canada. There is one exception for Canadian citizens who live abroad with their spouses.
Okay, and there's a note down here too with the sponsor and an applicant will be residing together in Canada when the applicant becomes a permanent resident. Explain that a little bit.
So this exception that applies to Canadian citizens, that if they reside abroad with their spouses, they still can proceed with family sponsorship. However, they will need to demonstrate to the government that they're ready to relocate back to Canada once the application is approved.
All right, let's talk to you about bars to sponsorship. There are some people that won't be able to sponsor someone to Canada. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, we have a list here of people who won't be able to sponsor their relatives. So it's someone who's in prison, that's someone who have not paid their alimony or child support, a person who declared bankruptcy but haven't been discharged yet, those who receive social assistance for reasons other than disability, and those who didn't pay immigration loans. We also, for persons who have failed to comply with the previous sponsorship agreement if they previously sponsored someone. Also, those convicted of violent crimes, any offense against relatives or any sexual offense. Basically, that's a domestic violence article. And those who are under removal order, but this only applies for to permanent residents because Canadian citizens cannot be under a removal order. And also, one more note that a sponsor who has previously been sponsored as a spouse or partner may not sponsor a new spouse for a 5-year period. That's a government way to try to control and prevent fake marriages.
Right. I was going to say at the bottom there, it looks like a note on the marriage of convenience, as it were, that you can't sponsor someone more than once in 5 years. Curious question for you. Can you sponsor the same person again? If it was denied before, can you apply to have the same person sponsored?
Well, for any immigration application, if it was denied, you always have an option to reapply, or you have an option to appeal it or apply for judicial review.
Okay. Let's talk about, again, who can I sponsor? We've got here spouse, common law, or conjugal partner, including same sex. Go into some of the stuff dealing with children and grandparents and such.
Spouses and common law partners are the one of the easiest category. If you're in a genuine marriage, I would say it's one of the most straightforward applications.
Okay.
For dependent children, sometimes people come to Canada as permanent residents and they leave their dependent children in their home country with the grandparents because they need to find a job. They're not ready to take the kids with them. So in this case, later on, they can sponsor their kids. It also applies to adopted children. One of the most popular categories after spousal sponsorship is parents and grandparents. Because obviously, once people immigrated, they settled in Canada, they want to bring their retired parents or grandparents to Canada to be with them. There's one more category for orphan sibling, but this only applies to minors. So if you have an orphan sibling, niece, nephew, or grandchild, they need to be under 18 for you to be able to sponsor them. I also covered adopted children. There is also one category that is always confusing for everyone.
It was very, so we went back and forth about this a couple of times. This
Yeah.
one was a little confusing to me. It's so if someone says, I want to sponsor an aunt or an uncle, which isn't in your list, apparently this last category could cover it.
This last category could cover, but only if this person have no other family. Meaning, if you're a permanent resident in Canada or a Canadian citizen and you have an uncle in your home country, you may only be able to sponsor your uncle if you don't have anyone in Canada or abroad. If you're not married, if you don't have living parents or grandparents or dependent children or a common law partner. And in this category, even if let's say you have an uncle, but you also have a parent, a father, but your father doesn't want to come to Canada, he doesn't want to be sponsored. Just the fact that you still have, that the father is in life and you can still sponsor him prevents you from sponsoring your uncle. So this category sometimes is called lonely Canadian because it only works if you have no other family.
Okay. That's sad, eh? Let's hope they can sponsor people. I mean, if you're all alone here, it'd be nice to be able to sponsor somebody. Let's go into some financial requirements because something that's interesting about this, you hear some complaints from the public at large that people are coming over. They might be on the government dime or something like that. That's not actually true. If you sponsor someone, you're on the hook in a lot of ways, not just emotionally, but also financially, aren't you?
Yeah, that's correct. The only category that does not have any financial requirements, I'm talking only about the requirements that need to show the government that you have a sufficient income to sponsor a family member, is a spouse category and dependent children category. For this one, you don't have to provide information about your income, and there is no minimum income requirement for you to sponsor your spouse or a child.
All right. And let's talk about other dependents. So we have your other relatives. Let's talk about that.
All other categories of sponsorship require you to prove that you have at least minimum necessary income or above to sponsor these categories of relatives. So for I'll start with parents and grandparents. To sponsor parents or grandparents, you must meet the minimum necessary income requirement plus 30%. You can find these tables with all the numbers on the government website. It's usually calculated based on family size. And for parents and grandparents program, you need to show income for 3 consecutive years before you submit your application.
Okay, let's talk. What is the LICO there, by the way? The LICO, just for people watching.
MNIA and LICO, it's essentially the same. It's just different names for the same term and the same requirement.
All right. We have here also, you may have a co-signer if your individual income is below the NI. Talk about that.
That's something that comes in play in parent sponsorship often, because if you're a married couple and you want to sponsor your parents, sometimes an individual income on one spouse is not enough to meet the requirement. Then your spouse can be a co-signer and you can use your household income to sponsor parents.
Right. And we have here just at the bottom, rules for Quebec are different. People can talk to you about that. But as is usual with Quebec, they kind of control their own destiny immigration-wise. So for questions about Quebec, please write into Polina. Let's talk more about the sponsorship undertaking. It's not just about the money. There's some other things to talk about too. Paulina, take us through this.
Yeah, often then when people contact us asking about sponsorship, they only think about it as a regular immigration application. Uh, like in 90% of cases, they're not aware that they're signing a sponsorship agreement with the government, and that's a binding agreement, and they have to undertake some responsibilities.
Okay. So what are some of these responsibilities here? I mean, there are responsibilities that we're going to talk about those, but I notice on this list here, you're kind of locked in there no matter what happens, isn't it?
Yes, so it's the binding agreement, and the undertaking won't be cancelled even if the person you sponsor becomes a Canadian citizen. If you become divorced, in case when you sponsor your spouse, or if relationship break down, if you're sponsoring your common law partner, it won't be cancelled even if you move abroad, or even if you move to other province, or if the person you sponsored moved to another country. And also, if your financial situation changed, if you have financial problems, you're still on the hook with this binding promise. You cannot withdraw from it.
Right. I mean, it's serious business, and it should be. I mean, if you're going to sponsor someone to Canada, you shouldn't be taking it lightly. Let's talk about the financial support, which might raise a few eyebrows here. You need to support your sponsored person in many ways, don't you?
Yes. So in this sponsorship agreement, you agree to provide financial support for basic needs for the person or persons, if we're talking of parents that you're sponsoring. And basic needs include food, clothes, shelter, and other needs for everyday living. It could be different in any individual case, depending on the age of the person that you're sponsoring. It also includes any health services that aren't covered by public health, because basically only support from the government that the sponsored person can get is a universal health care. But not everything is covered by universal health care in Canada. So it's also sponsor's responsibility if your relative needs dental care, eye care, or any other procedures that are not covered by the government. If people you sponsor receive social assistance, you'll have to pay back what they received during the time you're legally responsible for them. And for this one, it looks like about 2 years ago, the government started to actively enforce this paybacks, because we receive a lot of phone calls from people saying that, hey, I sponsored my parents, it didn't work. They went on social assistance. They now live in social housing, and the government is calling and they're telling me that I owe them 200 grants. And
Yeah, I can
people
see
don't
that.
want to pay.
Yeah, I can see that that would indeed be an eyebrow-raising phone call for people to receive. I mean, your answer back to them is basically, look, if the government says that's what you owe, that's what you owe.
It's irrevocable promise. There is nothing you can do. Sometimes you can negotiate the repayment scheme with the government, but there is no way around it. You cannot just withdraw from your responsibility and from your agreement.
Right, which is, I mean, again, it's a big undertaking. You should take it seriously, and I guess the upshot is that you better really like mom and dad coming over because you're going to be responsible for a lot of things.
And
Here,
sometimes
yeah,
people,
go ahead.
sorry, and sometimes people they just do not really realize the financial responsibility that they'll
Right.
have once their parents are here, and then once the parents or other relatives are here, they suddenly realize that they cannot make it, that it's too difficult financially for them, and then when problems start.
Right. It's a serious consideration. I mean, taking care of someone, it's going to cost a lot of money. That's just all there is to it. We have here the duration of the undertaking. So we've talked about what people are responsible for. We have here how long are they responsible for them. So go ahead and go through some of these.
If so, for spouses and common law partners, it's 3 years. From the oldest dates, that's from the date the person becomes a permanent resident. So once your spouse or common law partner landed in Canada as permanent resident, for 3 years, you're financially responsible for them. If a relationship breaks down and they go on social assistance, you'll have to repay whatever they received during this 3-year period. For adopted children under 22 years, it's 10 years, or until they turn 25, whatever comes first. For adult children over 22, it's 3 years. We're talking about dependent children. For parents and grandparents, it's 20 years. It was less before 2014, now it's 20 years. And for other relative category, it's 10 years. Some people are shocked by hearing 20 years.
I
But
think didn't you and I talk about that? I was like, really? So if my grandmother comes over, she's living with me for, or at least I'm responsible for her for 20 years, and you were like, you got it.
yeah, there's a reason for such a long period of time, because usually people sponsor their parents and grandparents then when they're already retired, and they don't know English well enough, and it's in 90% cases, again, that when they come to Canada, they do not work and they cannot go
Sure.
for work for health reasons, because of their age, and for other reasons. So the government want to make sure that they won't go on social assistance.
Right. I mean, again, I jokingly, I put this anchor on the slide just because we're trying to hammer it home that, of course, you want to help people with their sponsorship cases. You want to help bring their family to Canada, but you also want to hammer home that it is a serious consideration. This slide here, what if I change my mind, Paulina?
So if a person changes her mind, they can only do so from the day the application is submitted and before the final decision is made. And you can only withdraw this undertaking if the immigration office approves the withdrawal. So it's not, once you decided that you don't want to proceed with this sponsorship application, you need to contact the government as soon as possible and let them know that you want to withdraw your application. But be sure to wait for them to get back to you and confirm that they have this withdrawal registered, because sometimes people just send a letter and forget about it. But you need
Right.
to get a confirmation from the government that they actually have this withdrawal on file, because otherwise they may continue processing the application and make final decision. And after a final decision, there is no way back.
Right. And you've got here, like after the decision is made, a sponsor person becomes a permanent resident. That's it. I mean, it's obvious you can't tell someone to move back home or something like that. And once they are on the, what information does the RCC send out, by the way? Like, do they send you a letter saying, hey, it's been approved, the person can now come over? Or how does that work?
With permanent residents,
Yes.
yeah, well, once you approved, your parent gonna receive the letter saying that the application has been approved. The Canadian consulate abroad gonna request their passport. They'll place a visa in their passport, an immigrant visa for a person come to Canada and land as permanent resident. So the actual confirmation of permanent residence gonna be issued once person lands in Canada with this immigrant visa.
Okay. And then the final thing here, I just didn't want to skip, but a sponsor who has been previously sponsored as a spouse partner may not sponsor a new spouse partner for a 5-year period. Did we cover that earlier? Is that similar to that, or is it the same thing?
That's the similar note for the
Okay.
5-year ban for spouses.
Okay. Anything you want to see from people when they contact you right off the bat about sponsoring their family to Canada?
Well, if we're talking about parents and other relatives, we want to make sure that what they qualify in terms of their minimum required income for previous year or 3, depending on the category. Because sometimes it's challenging for, especially for self-employed people or people who own their own business, because of taxation and how they report their income. So if you're thinking of sponsoring your parents or grandparents, make sure that you can prove that for previous 3 years you have sufficient income, because without it, your application was just going to be refused.
Okay. Thanks, Paulina, for discussing this. You can reach her at Elizarova at pacelawfirm.com. Paulina, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.